Welcome to the Tech Humanist Show, a multimedia format program exploring how data and technology shape the human experience. I'm your host, Kate O'Neill.
If the protests are saying, think more creatively, find another solution, push, 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 and we are so smart as species, we can be, that we can find better solutions. Just don't get lazy. And I think there's a little just be fast, not be thoughtful.
Today I'm joined by Sarah Federman. Sarah is an associate professor of conflict resolution at the University of San Diego's Kroc School of Peace Studies and the author of the new book, Corporate Reckoning: How Businesses Can Address Historical Wrongs. Sarah studies how organizations respond to harm and accountability over time and what it takes to do restoration work when the harm is irreparable. In this conversation, we use the AI data center boom as a real-time case study in power asymmetry, community impact, and what responsible leadership looks like before reckoning is forced on you. Sarah Federman, thank you so much for joining us on the Tech Humanist Show.
I'm so excited to be with the Tech Humanists.
Well, I'm excited to be with the corporate reckoning person. I mean, this is a really interesting area that you found yourself in. Your research spans conflict resolution, corporate accountability, and institutional harm.
Institutional harm and genocide.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's so fascinating, but I want to make sure before we get into kind of the current moment that listeners have the right frame. So what is reckoning work and what makes it kind of categorically different from an apology, a CSR report, or an ESG commitment, for example?
Yeah. So if you study mass atrocity, as I had the great privilege of doing, you'll understand that there's ways that countries and people react in the aftermath. There's a lot that has to happen when there's been mass harm. So you might have trials, you'll have truth commissions, you'll have victim services, you'll have apologies, you'll have, there's a whole suite of things that happens to help restore. You can never totally repair because the harm is irreparable, but there are things that we've learned about to do. So reckoning work for the corporate space is just taking that same model from what we've learned from other mass harm and applying it in the corporate sector because they are actors too, just as governments are and individuals.
Yeah, it seems really relevant these days because I think a lot of executives are really struggling with how to be in the right positioning in the current moment. So I think your book is coming at exactly the right time.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, and so in the longer span of history, you've written about slavery ties in banking, about industries that caused harm over decades and then faced accountability long after. What drew you to studying that interval specifically, like the gap between when harm happens and when reckoning arrives? What's actually going on inside organizations during that time?
I would say I fell into this. I mean, I had an advertising background. They sent me to Paris. I saw my name on a Holocaust memorial wall, and my history professor had said, it wasn't me, it was like a 16-year-old girl who had been murdered. My history professor said, when you get to Paris, find out if the train drivers kept their jobs after the war. And when I saw my own name, I was like, oh my God, that's a really interesting question. What happens? During the era, you get taken and then it's legal at the time, but then the war ends and then what happens? Is everybody just let off the hook? Is there a reckoning? So that's what drew me into that. I started sneaking out of work and going to the Paris archives and that changed my direction. The slavery also, it can seem so long ago, but then I was teaching in Baltimore to Black students who were cool about the Holocaust, but what about us? And then I just stumbled upon actually the connection between banking and slavery that originated in Baltimore, that connection. And so that's how that grew out. So again, it was stumbling upon something.
Oh, that's really, really good information and a great perspective also because you mentioned seeing your name being this kind of catalyst. And I am excited about that mention because there's this idea I have about I'm a Kate O'Neill. There's a lot of Kate O'Neills out there. And I'm thinking that there's something about sharing a name that really connects us dimensionally with the experiences of other people and other places and other times. And it's really fascinating to hear you say that.
Oh, yeah. I looked up in the database for Holocaust victims and I just put my name in. And there were 25 Sarah Federmans killed. And I felt like my identity sort of shattered and broadened. That downside of that is Naomi Klein's Doppelganger book, where she
Yeah.
talks about her more complicated doppelganger, which is Naomi Wolf. She gets confused with Naomi Wolf a lot.
Yes.
So it can be complicated having a name like that. But for me, seeing myself again and again and again be murdered, I was like, I came into work, I was like, I feel like I was just murdered 25 times. It
Wow.
goes deep, yeah. And then you meet the people who survived it, and then it gets much more rich.
Yeah, I can only imagine. One of the things, speaking of, kind of these experiences across time, one of the things that strikes me about your work is that it implicitly argues that deferred harm isn't escaped harm. It's just relocated in time, right? And usually compounded. So when you look back at companies that eventually faced reckoning, what were they telling themselves during the window when they could have acted? And what
Oh
made
yeah.
inaction feel unreasonable
Yeah, I mean, when
or
you
feel
look at
reasonable?
like
Sorry.
during the Holocaust, during the railways specifically are sort of interesting. And people at the time, like in France, let's say, even though they didn't start World War II, like they were complicit. They're in the Holocaust in their own way. The railway workers, first of all, were really poor and they're at war and they were scared. And so like they have that frame. The executives, a number of them were just largely complicit. There was a new power broker in town and they wanted to be part of that. So that was sort of the trains always arrive on time and we want to stay committed. Their sort of fidelity was to the train company, then to the country, then maybe to some sort of ethical frame. So I think during the time, sometimes it's fear, sometimes well, it's terrible. We have to do it. And there's a kind of look away, especially if it's like a subsidiary in a faraway place, a US, like a Exxon had a subsidiary in Indonesia and they were doing some horrible things. And it's like, it's far away. It doesn't seem real. So I think sometimes it just doesn't seem real. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's fascinating that there's this intersection in our work that, and I find there's a concept I find useful in talking with leaders about technology decisions, which is the difference between the harms of action and the harms of inaction. And
Yeah.
I feel organizations often experience inaction as if it's neutral, as not making a choice. But how does your research complicate that?
Oh my God. Like when you see in the aftermath what happened and the impact of it, like the horror of the reckoning of what we could have done that we did not do. And it really informs me now. Like I'm on the board of an AI negotiation company, and I am like, whoa, if this takes off, like it's really gonna matter what our ethical statement is here, what our commitments are, because people take these decisions, it's gonna have impact. So it instilled that in me. Inaction is, I mean, we know, from your work too, it's a choice. And I think people don't realize partially they're in a business frame. And when I worked in business, when you worked in business, you're just trying to like get through the day and get everything done. You're not thinking in an ethical frame necessarily. But the protests right now and people they're saying, hey, ethical frame, ethical frame. And that should be helping people realize that there are choices to be made today that will have impacts down the line and
Yeah,
now.
so specifically, let's bring this into the present. AI data centers are being built
Yeah,
at a pace and scale. The communities hosting them weren't designed to absorb, right? Water,
right.
energy, land, infrastructure. From a conflict resolution standpoint, how do you read this moment?
Well, I think this is like we're seeing the AI impact and the power of it materially, physically through the energy centers, but it's been happening in terms of the political closeness between the AI, the big tech giants, and the government. They've been up to things, and now we're seeing the data centers. They're sort of the physical manifestation of that very close relationship. And we're talking about it, which means they're seeing ethical frame, ethical frame, ethical frame. And if they're ignoring that, right, on such a mass scale, they just don't have to listen because they're big and they go to poor towns and they can ignore the people. I mean, can for now, without apology. Right now, they're in a government that is really opening the door for them to do that, and it's only the people who are going to push back and people in those companies.
Yeah, well, but the power symmetry here, asymmetry, is
Yeah.
striking, right? A hyperscaler negotiating with a municipality that needs the tax revenue, and the community often lacks the technical capacity to really fully evaluate what it's agreeing to. So, what does good faith engagement even look like when the leverage is that unequal?
Yeah, we were just reading about some development project in San Diego where like the development company had done a quote survey locally, but had like picked people that they surveyed who were already in favor, right? This is not new.
Right.
But we're seeing really great investigative journalism actually asking the people who are going to be impacted. And the amount of cases I've seen where people push back, and when the people win, the power asymmetry is enormous. I mean, Aaron Brockovich's story being one of the most famous against PG&E, but even with the French railways, even with Exxon, like they have advocates that are very strong, like lawyers who work for that, who work on their behalf. But people have done it; they have pushed back, and if the protests are saying, think more creatively, find another solution, push, push, push. And we are so smart as species, we can be, that we can find better solutions. Just don't get lazy. And I think there's a little like, just be fast, not be thoughtful.
I love that. Just don't be lazy.
Being lazy.
You cite Exxon and other cases where the harm was visible well before accountability arrived. I wonder, for listeners who might feel like AI infrastructure is categorically different, newer, faster moving, more diffuse, what is the pattern that keeps reasserting itself regardless of industry or era?
Yeah, I mean the trains at the time during the Holocaust, right? So the Holocaust couldn't have happened without the trains. There's a book called Mechanization Takes Command, and it was really about how industrialization made mass murder possible. So they were going through their own thing. But what we've seen is that like every time has its own conundrums, but these legacies, these issues, it all comes back. And you're on like if a company does something horrible and then like the people forget, but then they do something horrible again and then people react and then forget, that starts to build sort of a chart over time that starts to form into an identity. Like there are some companies again and again and again and again and again, and we start to see who they are. So yes, it's categorically different. Yes, we're going through something else, but we see the harm. I mean, people are not so confused about what the harm is. They're just scared about how we're going to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then in going back to your thought on like just don't be lazy, right? The something that I think about in my own work and wrote about in What Matters Next is what I call ethical acceleration. The idea that as technology scales faster, the window for responsible intervention compresses, which means we need different tools for making decisions in that kind of environment. So the speed of AI deployment means that by the time harm is undeniable, the systems are already deeply embedded. And so I wonder, does your research suggest that the old reckoning timelines hold, or does acceleration actually change how accountability operates, like when it arrives, who it falls on, and maybe what form it takes?
Yeah, I love your idea of ethical acceleration because we're seeing it in two different ways. One, for example, during the civil war in Syria, people were taking videos of war crimes during the war. So the idea was people were preparing for reckoning during the war. And the Syrian War Archive had like 8 million videos. I mean, it was something enormous. It might even be more now, that then have to be validated and all of that, and verified. But the idea is that, yes, like people are preparing for the reckoning while it's happening. So there is this sort of real time visual acknowledgement of what's happening and record keeping. So there is that documentation happening. And there's also that's the thinking fast. That's the now. But the slow is that the harm will be long term. So that it's accelerating, but we're going to see the impacts over time. And the reckoning is going to have to be over time. So there's going to be two levels of this. The acceleration is, yes, what you do is making a difference. So think about what you're doing every day. Like think about your legacy every day, and just nudge towards doing better and listen to the people who are advising you. I was so excited when the company I'm advising really embraced my like, I'm being the ethics hall monitor here at every turn. And they're like, that's why we wanted you. And thank you. And help us with this statement. And I was like, thanks for letting me in rather than getting defensive. So I think because of the acceleration, we really need our tech people to not be defensive and help us. Help you make better decisions and protect your legacy as well.
I love that example of the Syrian
More
civil
kind.
citizen journalism as
Mhm.
a sort of emergent response, like an emergent form of accountability taking, right? And
Yeah.
it seems like a really good observation that yes, there will be emergent forms of accountability, like that people will find ways of holding it. You may think that you're going so fast that nobody can hold you accountable, but there will be emergent mechanisms, right? That's so
There is.
interesting.
Reckoning work is goes over time. Like there's still stuff emerging around slavery. There's stuff around colonialism. There's stuff it comes back. You may not feel it if you're like on the high of the moment. But you know what goes around comes around. Like you know in your own life, if you've lived long enough, that some of your actions come to bite you in the butt. Like it's not so
Yes.
surprising that this would happen too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's right. One of the arguments in your book is that reckoning often arrives before any playbook exists for handling it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering for a technology leader who genuinely wants to act inside the window, not because they're forced to, but
Yeah.
because they can see what's coming, where do you start? What are the first moves that are both ethically serious and operationally feasible?
Yeah, I think it's important to one, keep the ethical frame as part of your identity. Because if there was a really interesting study, I think it was done at Notre Dame, but it was like if you put people in a business frame, they just like don't even see the ethical issue. Like they're it's not that they don't care. They're literally just like focused on surviving, focused on the competition, changing technology. But if you add an ethical frame, they'll shift and be like, oh, what about that? So it's about constantly keeping that question of like legacy. What's our legacy? Oh, what's our quarterly earnings, but what's going to be our legacy? How is that shaping up, and what are we learning about that? That also means engaging with those who are impacted by the company, not necessarily just the shareholders or the customers, but in those communities, for example, where the AI data centers are. Those are stakeholders. So that framework of stakeholder capitalism makes sense. Like if you actually want to stay grounded, talk to them. I mean, it doesn't once you have proximity to the people who are affected and the ecosystems that are affected, it's much harder to shake it off.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm also wondering, though, I would imagine that there are leaders who worry that acknowledging harm opens them up to legal or reputational
Mhm.
exposure. And so, what's the honest argument for acting anyway? And are there ways for them to begin that don't require putting the organization in an impossible
Yeah.
position?
Well, first of all, and I'm in this moment, we're talking more about companies that have longer histories and they're afraid about acknowledge. So in that case, one, it's a lot easier for the company if it acknowledges the harm and responds to it before others are asking them to do it or before they're being sued. Because once people come at you and it comes from the outside, anything you do looks like you're trying to just do it to get out of trouble. So it's hard to have anything look sincere. It's hard to demonstrate care. It can be done, but there is the honest argument is better to do it yourself and take responsibility for it and get those best efforts, stay engaged with the community and take the feedback that's going to be inconvenient. All right. It's going to slow you down in the now to make sure that the legacy is more what you want down the line.
I'm really fascinated with this ongoing now and long horizon framing in your work. And I just keep coming back to like how fascinating it is that you'll find in my book. I know you just mentioned before we started recording that you ordered my book. The now next continuum is the main model in my book. And I think we're gonna end up like coming back to this and going like, let's do another episode because we got
Yeah,
so much
now and
more to talk
then.
about. Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, we've barreled through a lot of the questions I prepared. I have a few left for you, but I'm so grateful that we've had this time. And I just want like the sort of second to last question I have for you is I know that you testified before Congress on institutional responsibility for slavery ties. And I mean, that's accountability at a scale and distance that most leaders never have to reckon with. But what did that experience teach you about, I mean, how institutions actually change versus how they perform change?
Oh my gosh. They weren't even performing change. The banks that were there, yeah, they were asked like, how many have a plan to address their slavery ties, and not one of them raised their hand, right? So one thing is like you sometimes just have to keep pressuring them, pressuring them, pressuring them, pressuring them. And it can wake up people within the company to, oh my God, we have to deal with this. But some of them, it is just like like being very persistent until they acknowledge it. It's hard because they might do the work but not care. So how do you get them to care is another thing. One thing I saw Yale do is that when they were starting to study their slavery ties fairly recently, but really a deep dive, they took the entire board of trustees to the Legacy of Slavery Museum in Montgomery, Alabama, to help people understand why this matters. Because I think otherwise it just feels like another thing to do. But when they were like, oh, like now we get it. And the creator of that museum, Brian Stevenson, just keeps saying proximity, proximity, proximity. That's how you get people to like really instill. So I do think if people, those banks went to some other site that really helped them understand, that would be like the deeper shift that we'd like to see.
Yeah. Man, you are fascinating and your work is fascinating. Your work is important. And it also seems like it must be discouraging at times. Yet you must have some mechanism for how you bring yourself back to hope. So I wonder it's a question I always love to close with, what keeps you hopeful? I mean, you've spent your career studying harm and deferral and this long arc of accountability and the cases where the ledger stays open for decades and sometimes centuries. So in the face of all that, Sarah Federman, what gives you hope?
Well, there are these moments where there's like real possibilities for reckoning, where it moves forward and then it stagnates, but then it happens again. Like things ebb and flow. Like right now we seem to be in a corporate impunity moment, but it will go back. And like then we'll run the ball down the field, do as much as we can, and just bear witness right now and keep recording it, keep making sure that we see, and help people make better decisions. So what makes me hopeful is actually studying history over time. The other thing that kept me hopeful is that I interviewed 90 Holocaust survivors for the book, Last Train to Auschwitz. And it meant something to them when the train company, most of them, when the train company decided to do something or even acknowledge the harm. Like even in their 80s, even 70 years later, when the company said, actually, we care and we regret this and we want to help, it meant something. So there was this feeling of it's never too late, and that's hopeful. Like I see that meaningful work, even for descendants of enslaved people, like it can make an impact today. So I think it's exciting that there are so many things we can do now that can make our future better, our next, a better next, and help us address the legacies of the past. So I think focusing on doing those productive projects is what keeps me going.
Oh, we're so grateful that you do. I cannot thank you enough for joining us and talking through this work. Sarah Federman, where can people find out more about you and about your book that's coming out on what date?
All right. So the book comes out April 21st, 2026, but it's available for pre-order now. So get it from your independent bookstore. Or Barnes & Noble has been very good with local authors and things too. So I'm like increasingly a returning fan. But yeah, so I'm very available online. That's probably maybe a good thing, maybe not. But sarahfederman.com. If you just type in Sarah Federman, you'll either find me or another amazing Sarah Federman who works on carbon.
That's so funny. That's exactly like if you search Kate O'Neill and you don't specify tech humanist, you will either find me or you'll find Dr. Kate O'Neill of Berkeley, who is the author of Waste and does a lot of work around environment. So
amazing.
You're not going to go wrong either way. Yeah, that's hilarious. Great. SarahFederman.com. We'll find you. We'll find out all about you, and we will be able to cheer you on in this amazing and important work that you're doing. Thank you.
Yeah, same for you. Thank you.
Thank you a million for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to The Tech Humanist Show. This episode was produced and edited by Thrive Loud Productions, with research by Ashley Robinson and Aaron Daughtry of Interabang. You can find more information about the show's guests and links to their projects at thetechhumanist.com, where you can also find more episodes, or you can subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Special thanks to all of our guests for lending their voices to help make the future a brighter place. I am Kate O'Neill. You've been listening to The Tech Humanist Show from KO Insights.